This whole thing.
Oh, over here, something. Somebody picked something.
Please be seated.
We had a little technical
back.
difficulty.
Thanks, Mark.
Work with these computers. Ready to go. Mr. McCarthy.
Thank you, Your Honor. I want to talk now about the on-indictment. I said that there was a rush to judgment in the case, that Bob was the person who was picked out. He was the target right from the beginning, and that the people will pay any price in order to be able to assure that this man here is convicted of the crimes with which he's been charged. First on that list is Paul Monroe. Paul Monroe has not been charged with, number one, delivering cocaine. He said at the preliminary examination that he gave Bob some cocaine out of the goodness of his heart, a substantial amount of it. Then during the trial, he admitted that he lied when he did that, and we said that at the preliminary examination, but actually he had sold cocaine to Bob. Now either one of those things is delivery of a controlled substance, but he hasn't been charged with any crime for that. Furthermore, you can't have it both ways. You can't be telling the truth under oath at the preliminary examination and say something opposite at the trial. He's not charged with perjury. Third, the reason he's here is to say that Bob confessed to him. So, in order to get him up there on that witness stand, they had to not only not charge him with the perjury, the drug dealing, but also with putting in the false tips. He's the one who drops the dime on April Montgomery and Charles Wilson. Why does he do that? He says it's because Bob told him to do it. Well, the only thing that those phone records from that area, 6 Mile and Woodward, prove is that Bob was over there in that area getting some cocaine from Paul Monroe. That probably is true, because we know from Jim Wilson's testimony that Bob did dabble in cocaine. By the time he's getting some cocaine from Paul Monroe, he probably is under a tremendous amount of stress. By the time you get out to June of 2012, Mrs. Bashara has been dead for 4 or 5 months. The investigation is ongoing. He is the target, and I'm certain that would create a tremendous amount of stress in your life. And if you use a controlled substance to try and relieve that stress, maybe that's exactly what he was doing. But that doesn't mean that he was over there confessing to Paul Monroe, or that he was asking Paul Monroe to make up these stories about April Montgomery and Charles Wilson. Monroe had his own reasons for doing that. That was his old girlfriend, April. She jilted him for Charles Wilson. So he's got that reason alone to be sore at the two of them. And then when he testified, he says, well, matter of fact, Charles Wilson armed robbed me one time. Well, what better way to get even with a guy that robbed you than to have the cops sick on you for something that you didn't do? The next person, Robert Fick, testified during the trial unequivocally without immunity that he perjured himself when he testified under oath at the investigative subpoena on May 9, 2012. Never been charged. Darrell Bradford, he's the guy that you didn't see, but by stipulation, we know that Mr. Bradford also gave a false tip to the police, identifying April Montgomery as a person who had a reason to be killing Jane Bashara, and he did that at the behest of Paul Monroe, who had his own reasons for sicking the police on Miss Montgomery and Charles Wilson. He's never been charged. And we got Therese Giffen, Nancy Bashara, and Stephanie Samuel all receiving immunity. And it's one thing that I think that's not correct. Stephanie Samuel had no knowledge that she, to be tampering with this gun. I don't believe that she really hid that. The thing is she's got these bullets that end up in her house over in Windsor. And that's not until she takes some things out of Bob's house, out of his file drawer, and moves them over to Windsor, she says. And this is after Bob's been arrested, and after the Detroit Police Department conducted a thorough search in his home on the 27th day of January and never find those bullets. And the Michigan State Police come 2 weeks later on the 8th of February in 2012, and they never find them either. Yet they search the place from top to bottom. And among the things that they find is the will and the trust of Jane. So they're into the drawers, they're into all the private places and looking all over the place, but they didn't find those bullets. So how do we know that those ever belonged to Bob? And then we've got Larry Ellington, brother Steve Vergona, who never showed up with all those notes that he says he took about the things that Joe Gens told him, even though he was ordered to do so, he got a free pass. And then we got Larry Ellington. Now, Larry Ellington says that Bob ordered not 1, but 4 hits on people when he was a prisoner over at the Oaks Correctional Facility in Manistee. They're together for 1 week, from the 15th of May to the 21st of May, before Larry Ellington writes a letter to Kim Worthy and says, hey, you will be very interested to hear what it is that Bob Bashara is telling me. And then he writes a letter to his lawyer. He says, Bob Bashara has asked me to have hits done on 2 people on the same day. And then, a couple weeks later, 6th of June, Detective Matuk goes out to the Oaks to talk to Larry Ellington. And what does he say? He says, there's 3 people. Now it's Joe Gens, Steve Tabato, and Ms. Thomas Ramsey. And by the time Ms. Lindsay goes out there to do the investigative subpoena, the story grows even greater. And he says, now they want you, or Bob wants you too. So there's 4 people. And of course, Bob hasn't been charged with a crime as a result of Larry Ellington saying those things. And why would that be? Because another thing about character development I learned in studying English is we learn about character 3 ways. 1 is what a character says. 2 is what a character does. And 3 is what other people say about it. And when a prosecutor's office doesn't bring any charges against Bob on Larry Ellington's word, that tells you that Larry Ellington is a useful idiot. In this case, come in and testify against him to say that Bob did those things. But no one's going to bring a prosecution solely on the word of Larry Ellington. Don't forget, he's the guy who's the fiction writer. Rise to Power, his book, made it up out of his mind, his whole imagination. He's an opportunist. This was a way that he could work a deal for himself by saying that Bob did some bad things and ordered these hits. And then get some consideration when he goes back for resentencing. So you ask yourself about the $50. Well, I submit to you that Mr. Bashara, who's from Grosse Pointe, a white man who's never been to prison before, finds himself in the unfortunate circumstance of being on level 4 of the Oaks Correctional Facility, a dangerous place. Larry Ellington is sitting there in a cell with him, probably explaining the circumstances of his current position and location, telling him that he's connected with the Moors, some sort of gang network connected from one prison to another. Larry, well, he wasn't rotating then, I guess, whatever that means, but nevertheless, he's connected. And if he can provide protection to Bob, Bob's going to need it. This is a dangerous place. So when you see that clip of Bob and Larry walking around the yard together, that's because Larry's right there. He's his protection. He's looking out for him. The word goes out to all those Moors and any other bad guys that might be hurting Bob in there. Larry is looking out for me. But protection has a price. High cost of living in prison. So Rick Falcinelli reluctantly puts $50 into his account, Larry Ellington's account, because Bob said so. Well, why did Bob want to have Larry get $50? For a hit? No, so that he's not hit. Why did Bob write out that thing about the house on Guilford Street and show him that there's some income that can be derived from this? Because that's going to be a benefit to Larry Ellington, to protect him. The difference between what he is and what merely seems to be. Those are the things to think of. Now with Joe Gens, you got Mary Moore, saying number 22, is it? You got Rebecca Thornton, the landlord. She makes all this big deal about Bob, saying that he's known Joe all this time. Bob is her agent. She hired him, but she never paid him. She stiffed him on putting Joe in that house. Of course he showed up with the lease. Of course he's got a receipt. Of course he's got that other document, the application. That's his job. That's what she hired him to do. She wants to disavow all that stuff and make him look like he's somehow or another guilty. That wasn't his 10 $100 bills that she received that day. Those were Joe's. He's handing them to her because he's acting as the agent. And the receipt is signed by Bob Bashara and Mrs. Thornton. So it's not like it's Bob's money doing the getting into this place. It is Joe's money, and he's acting as Miss Thornton's agent. And then we've got Mary Moore. She's the person that's with Joe the day after the death of Mrs. Bashara. This is on, she works at the St. Vincent de Paul. She's given him a ride over to the phone store. He's supposedly got a lot of money on him. He buys a new phone, and he tells her, during her testimony, she said that Bob told her that he was going to buy a car, going to buy one. Not, I'm getting one. Why's Joe got to buy a car if he's getting a Cadillac from Bob and $8,000 or whatever story Joe told about how much he was being paid for killing Jane Bashara? Why would he tell Mary Morey that he's going to go out and buy a car? And she also said that he likes going to casinos. So we don't know where that money came from. And we also know that Jane didn't have any money in her purse or her wallet. Laura Calloway, she says that Bob drops off that check. Take a good look at that. The check says Joe. Doesn't even say Joe Gentz. But it's not for anyone other than Joe Gentz, but it's made out to him for $452. Bob takes that in there into that store himself to leave it for Joe. He identified himself to Laura Calloway, so he's not hiding his connection, and maybe it's an odd thing that he would do that the day after he finds out that his wife is dead, but he's sure not secreting who he is. He is out there openly and notoriously saying, hey, listen, when this guy Gentz comes here, give him this check. I'm Bob Bashara. And then we've already talked about Mr. Brewster. Now, next phase of the closing argument is going to be presented by my colleague and partner in this case, Lillian Diallo. And so, Ms. Diallo, it's your show.
Thank you.
Can attorneys oppose?
All right, ladies and gentlemen of this jury, I have spent 1/5 almost of a year with you guys, and thank you and good afternoon. Now, before we get started with my portion of this closing, I'm going to tell you and look you in the face when I tell you. I told you there were 3 things in this case. Excuse me. Oh, I know.
Come on,
Okay. I told you in the beginning, and I looked you in your face, and I told you there were 3 things that were absolutely not going to be true. And I told you that. And I told you, BDSM, that was not going to be a motive for murder in this case. And how do we know that it would not be a motive for murder? We heard it from Jane's friend, Mrs. Lois Valente, who spoke about some kind of key party in 2009, which would mean that Mrs. Bashara had some knowledge therein. I also looked you in your face, and I'm looking you in your faces again, and I am telling you that Rachel Gillette, that was not going to be anybody's motive for murder. And why is that? Leave, come back, but she always came back. And when Madam Prosecutor spoke to the fact that he couldn't afford to have a wife and Rachel, let me submit this to you after everything you've seen. He could not have Rachel without not only a wife, but that wife that provided the money and the comfort that he had grown accustomed to. Now, you might ask, when all of these women, there are 3 out of them, came up talking about being flogged, talking about all kinds of sex, everything in the world that had nothing to do with this case, why did Lillian Diallo not question not one of them? I had to hand that off to Mr. McCarthy, and from the bottom of my heart, I thank him for that. It was embarrassing, it was humiliating, it was beneath the dignity of a courtroom, but we had to deal with that. And I had to sit there. We had to listen to all kinds of sex acts. That has nothing to do with Mrs. Bashara dying. Nothing. But we listened to it. And listened to it a whole lot. So thank you so very much. And Mrs. Therese Giffen, and remember, we're not the first attorneys on here, but there's always been one prosecution team on here. We didn't have the benefit of seeing these people or knowing these people until they sat up there. Miss Therese Giffen, ex-police officer, ask yourself why. You are talking about grasping at straws. Straws were grasped in this particular case, and I'm going to tell you something else. The prosecution became vested in this case. And I promise you, I had no way of knowing, you suspect, until Ms. Lindsay told us. Who knew that there were meetings with the head prosecutor? Who knew? When you're talking about justice for Jane, that should not equal injustice for Bob. Next slide. Now, if it comes up, it's going to say Joseph Gens. It doesn't even have to come up. I can start without it. Okay. We have Joseph Gens. Joseph Gens, who is, in fact, he's the confessed killer in this particular matter. We have Stephen Tabato, a hitman, or a self-professed hitman, and Stephen Vergona, a friend. Someone said, and I believe it was Miss Lindsay, that Joe Gens would have no earthly reason to go over to the house. Let's do this. Who said it happened at the house? Who said? See, remember, their theory was predicated upon, and Jimenez was up there, and we'll get into this a whole lot later, a leaf being on Mrs. Bashara's foot. That leaf could not match the leaves that were in, as a matter of fact, he said at first there were no leaves in the apple. Now remember, professional witness, he knows how to testify, he's from elite homicide. Okay. No, he can lie. The Supreme Court said you can lie. That's okay. You just wouldn't think they would lie and girl. But that's fine. He says that leaf matched, so they determined that scene had to have happened over there in Grosse Pointe some kind of way. Well, and I thank sincerely Captain Locke, because had the leaf been in the prosecutor's possession before, would we be sitting here? I don't know. But you understand, in that garage, what was on her foot did not match what was in the garage. So, who said it happened in the garage now? It's your theory that it happened in the garage. You have the Grosse Pointes, you have all these people out there, yet nobody, not one person that they put on this stand sees that. Okay. Stephen Tabato, hitman extraordinaire. Remember, he's the one that you would go to. If you have a problem with the tenant, have some problems, you come to Stephen Tabato. Stephen Vergona, friend. Remember, that's Joe Gens's friend, and that's the person he went to get him out of trouble before with the police. Now, we have Joseph Gens. And within these relationships of Joseph Gens, you heard talk about rings. You saw text messages about these rings. What did we not find? You never found the earring of Mrs. Jane Bashara. Those police officers searched that house on the 27th. And this is experience. This is not somebody that didn't understand. This is Detroit homicide that go into that house and they search. And what did they get out? They get out a will for proof of residence. The purse had her license in it, but okay, we'll take that. What do you see in the will? You do not see a motive for murder because within the will that they just put up, Bob can't control anything, not by himself. That's in their house. How is that a motive for murder? Okay, but in any event, we have Mr. Bergona's friend, Mr. Gintz, the confessed killer, going to the police whenever, but the police came to him first. They kind of glossed over that one. The police went to Gintz first after the letter that was given to to the Grosse Pointe Police Department by the attorney. And that was a letter that was stipulated to. The letter goes in first. And then they come looking for Gintz. And then Gintz comes to the police station. And he comes to the police station with his friend. He has a scratch on his face. He's the one that allegedly says something about DNA. And they find some DNA. You're going to find DNA. They find that DNA. Okay. So, Mr. Bergona is the first person, and I asked him, the first person that said Bob Bashara. He's the first person that put Bob Bashara's name into this whole equation. And part of what he said about why he put Bob Bashara's name into this, you can get a plea deal. This was testified to. It's on the record, and you got to see Mr. Bergona. Next slide. Look. Okay. Mr. Tabato. Mr. Tabato comes here, and he testifies. And when I ask him questions, and I hope I'm speaking the English language, he couldn't understand anything I asked. He couldn't read a paper. I had to take him paper. I had to keep getting insulted, being called hun, babe, all of that. Not a problem. You snatched from me. Not a problem. You couldn't read anything on the paper when it was time for me and you to look at this paper. But magically, he could read what the prosecution, whenever they handed him a paper, he understood their questions. What happens with Mr. Tabato that's really important? You hear in that long wire, June 22nd, him having a conversation with Hess. I don't know if they knew it was recorded, but he tells Hess, hopefully I can get him to parlay. So you know there had been a conversation, and it's only, look at the transcript, June 22nd, in the beginning. There's some conversation that we don't know about between Hess and Tabato. And not only that, Mr. Tabato, also unindicted, is the reason why he sits here today. And this would be Bob Bashara. And I'm going to tell you why. Did you hear what they said? Without that piece of evidence, see, you can build on that. You heard those tapes. You heard how Stephen Tabato was talking. You heard how he reeled him in. Were you foolish? Were you stupid? Oh yeah. You were real stupid and you were real foolish. But listen to this. When you're having these meetings with Judge Worthy, when you're up there, whether you attend or you don't attend, you know what you need to say. You know what you need to at least put out there to make it look like you did something. And when you have 2 years to do it, listen, everybody should be scared behind that one. Because guess who never got to get on that witness stand and look that man in his face and everybody else, you in your face, and tell you what Bob Bashara allegedly did? Joseph Gintz.
Objections. The person has the right to remain silent. He has the right to remain silent. He has the right, just like
Judge. No, this was some. If you want me to move on, I can.
Please.
However, please. Okay. Well, in any event, we had to hear through Stephen Bergona what was said, and here's what's telling. You had Detective Jimenez, this elite homicide guy, sat right up there, took the oath. You know he lied to your face one time, and maybe you didn't catch this, but let me help you with this. He says, and we were looking at the leaf, the alleged leaf in this garage. Jimenez. Yes, ma'am. He says, yeah, that was there when we were there on the 27th. Really? I said, well, what about that was photographed February 8th? Oh, well, it could have been. That's okay. no consequence and of no moment, that lease was a vital part of this case and a Grosse Pointe keeping jurisdiction. And guess what else? When they say that Detroit was not involved with this, they were involved from day one with Olson, who got up there, looked you in your face and said, there's only one way that, people grieve. Oh, really? Well, let me tell you. As someone that has lost a mother and a father a year apart, unexpectedly, you do not have a book for dealing with that. I was in court, my mother passed Sunday. That Monday, I'm in front of a court of law, standing there. And if you think I didn't feel that, you have another thought coming. You cannot dictate one individual how anybody responds and reacts. But that's the arrogance of this investigation. It's the arrogance of their position. Their sights were set on Bob. And yeah, it helped that he had all kind of crazy sex, freaky sex. What does that have to do? So had he told the truth about having an affair on the 27th, he wouldn't have to sit here? You say that shows you're guilty because you're having an affair and your wife is killed? They are wrong. Okay. Now, this is what we get from that wire that Stephen Tabado had. And this is in evidence. From Mr. Bashara. This happens June the 19th, 2012, part 1. Came over to my house looking for money. You heard this from Mr. Bashara. And Mr. Bashara didn't know he was being recorded because they made a great big deal about him patting him down. He didn't know he was being recorded. Okay. I gave him I put power in his name, okay? His power in my name, so he got his Edison bill cleared up. He's never even paid it. They shut him off, so he's pissed off about that. And what you have to remember, ladies and gentlemen, at this time, Mr. Bashara was represented by counsel. We're not all yoked the same, but we can all have attorney at law if we pass that bar. But that's okay. Then next, I put power in my name. I helped give him little odd jobs, okay? And then he fucking comes over to my house desperately, runs across my wife, hasn't been taking his medicine, and fucking blows up and kills her, and then he throws me under the bus and names me to get off. You watch. He's going to plead down to second-degree murder and 20 years as opposed to life. It's going down. What he's saying, and what they want you to gloss over in that, this is out of Mr. Bashara's mouth. He told you what was going to happen. He didn't say, hey, I got to kill him before it happens. He's saying it's going to happen. It is going to happen, it's going down. And why would somebody be offended at that? Well, a couple of reasons you could be offended. You allegedly, now this is their theory, come to the house. This is the prosecution's theory. And this happens. I'm not so sure, and we'll talk about that later. Next, please. Here's some more of that wire. And boy, did we get to hear a whole lot of Mr. Bashara. But in any event, Mr. Bashara, look it, Steve, here's the deal. I didn't kill my wife. I didn't pay Joe to do it. I didn't hire Joe to do it. He's an idiot. Let's stop right there. Now, this is a little thing, but this is how you know they work together to string this case up. They say that, and I believe Ellington said he called him a fucking retard, or I don't know, because that's derogatory, right? Whenever you hear on these tapes, Mr. Bashara, any of those calls, you don't hear him saying that. But that's okay. We can put that together because we're the power of the people. But in any event, you think I'm going to hire him to kill my wife in my garage when I'm in town? You think I would actually do something like that, the mother of my children? You have a fucking thought coming if you think I'm capable. Now, see, all the prosecutor wanted you to key in on is when I'm in town. I guess what they're trying to say is he wanted this done when he was out of town. I don't know. But You got to put it all together. You cannot live in a vacuum. You got to look at it all. You got to listen to it all. Next slide, please. Mr. Tabata, Gantz is going to cut a deal. He already is. He's testifying against me. He's cutting a deal against me. I'm telling you, hey. And you know, we have some of these exhibits, and one of the last defense exhibits entered was the Register of Actions with Joe Gantz's history of this case that started in March. So this has not been something that was new and coming. But who had the pressure in June? Who turned that pressure up because they knew what they had to do? Because the competency, remember, the prosecution knows about this competency. It's their case. They turned it up. And that's when you start seeing Steve Tabata hit the scene. And ask yourself this. Ask yourself this. Steve Tabata, you hear him talking to Fana. And what he's saying is, okay, well, the place right there, we got to shut things down, do things a little differently, something along those lines. What is he doing over there? Who knows? Who cares? But I tell you this, the man got, 2, 3 guns, I don't know, a knife, another unindicted person. Because I don't know, how many guns can you carry with a CPL? I just thought it was one. But hey, new rules, new people. Okay, go ahead. Next. Okay. Here you go. Next screen. This is the June 22nd wire. And this is if you go and you get this exhibit, I would welcome you to get that. And please read from the beginning where you hear the conversation between him and Hess talking about getting it all together because they have a plan. They've been meeting. They know what they need to do to put Mr. Bashara in that chair. And they use the willing Mr. Tabata. Mr. Bada boom, bada bing, I can get me a grenade launcher. That's okay. We'll go back to him. So he tells, Mr. Bashara says, going to cut a deal and go after me. Anything you can do to help me. Now, is he saying, hey, I killed my wife? He don't know he's being recorded. I killed him. Yeah, I did. I messed up. I hired against him. You will never hear that on any of these tapes that he didn't know were being recorded. You're not going to hear it. I'm innocent, okay? This Gantz either acted alone or had someone else help him, but not me. Why would I want to kill my wife? There's no reason to. She was making $125 a year. Her and I got along great. And how do you know that's true? From the witnesses that you better believe by now, if they don't hate him, I don't know why not, because you hear about all this disgusting sex. He's been muddied up, dirtied up, everywhere he can be dirtied up. And speaking of dirtying up and not listening to this case, and that's what, just listen to the case. When we first got started, when Mrs. Lindsay was talking to Rachel Gillette, she said something that kind of made the hair on my neck stand up. She said something about Rachel Gillette or Bob Bashara using the N-word. Ask yourself why in the world that was relevant. I'll tell you why it was relevant. So you wouldn't listen, you'd be offended and insulted. And you're not going to listen to the case. But guess what? On none of those tapes that you hear Mr. Bashara saying that, calling anybody the N-word. Well, we do know Joseph Gantz did, and we'll go back to that later. Now, Mr. Bashara, I know, let me tell you that this defense attorney he's got is partnering up with the prosecution to throw me under the bus. They're going to cut a deal and go after me. Looks just like a prophet. He didn't lie about that. Next screen. Now here's Mr. Stephen Vergona. Stephen Vergona is another one of the unindicted. Let me tell you why Stephen Vergona is unindicted. He was under, you heard them, subpoena to bring documents to the prosecutor's office. He never brought them. There's no penalty because he helped them. He helped them in their goal. And then, and I'm talking to just Mr. Tabata a little bit. He's another one. Now, he sat there and committed perjury. You know how he did that? Day one, he's testifying. He goes, no, Joe just had big feet. He just, he's kicking, he got things in the way. He got in the way. He's kicking them because he had big feet. Day two, we go to the transcript where he testified under oath before. I said, well, Mr. Tabaro, in the transcript it says he worked for you and you had to let him go because he was kicking stuff around and using the N-word. Okay, so if I can get this straight, the theory is you gonna prosecute crimes, right? Because that's what you're here to do. But guess what? Perjury is only perjury if the prosecutor says it so. They have the power to charge it, not us. You understand? So you can get up on that stand, you can lie like a rug, whatever. If they don't charge it, it's not so. It's unfortunate, but that's the way the law goes. But in any event, Mr. Bergona, he goes to the police on the 30th. And he tells them that he talks to Jimenez and never mentions Bob Bashar's name. And I went through this whole thing with Detective Jimenez. I said, Detective, you know how to take a statement. You know how to write a police report. You know the purpose of writing a police report. It's not whether you have on red shoes or blue shoes, you have on underwear, no underwear. You know the purpose of writing a police report. We went over what he put in there, what Joe Gintz told him. Nowhere in that first statement was Bob Bashara's name mentioned. But guess what Steve Bergona does say? He says that you can cut a deal, Joe. You cut a deal, a plea deal. And guess what he did? He cut a plea deal, and his friend helped him. He helped him, and he was in communication with Mr. Gintz. And guess what we found out? Sitting in this trial, that on the 24th, they were together. Stephen Bergona and Joe Gintz were together. And what else did we find out? That just happened. I'm looking at the back of the check that Mr. Simona had cashed at the party store for Joe. On the back of that check, I'm thinking maybe it's Joe Gintz's name, or one of his nicknames is JJ. Joe Gintz, okay. JJ is a whole different person. Up until that time, I did not know that. Okay, that's fine. Maybe it means something, maybe it doesn't. What else do we find out? JJ was with him, and that would be Joe Gintz on the 24th. That was testimony on that stand. Okay. And I remember asking ATF agent Drew, and we can get more into him in a bit, a couple of questions. They were hammering about this text message that was sent 12:10 to one of the women that Mr. Gintz was in communication with. Hun, if you know somebody's going to do something to somebody, where do you go? What do you do? I have to watch my ass. Okay. And then you're saying you talked to Mr. Bashara before that, after, whenever, I think it was before. And from that right there, that's how you know that Bob Bashara hired him or wanted him to kill Jane Bashara. The 12:17 text message that Stan Brew testified to was between, he had to come back, remember he testified 3 times. He had to come back. 12:17, there was a text message talking between Bergona and Gintz. Something about Letty being dead and the Hartel brothers did. I asked ATF agent Brew, is that something you would been interested in? Oh, absolutely. What didn't they do? They didn't get his phone records. Steve Bergona, and we have that because remember, 12:10 is closer in time to, 12:17 is closer in time to 12:10 than 1:24. You didn't investigate that angle because it did not fit with the group meetings that you were having. What else does Stephen Bergona say? Who knew? He said that he had to get a lawyer to cover himself. What do you mean? Before you talked to the police, you said you have, it's in the record, you have to get a lawyer to cover yourself. What the heck do you need covering for? I don't, before anything, why do you need covering? You didn't do anything wrong, right? You just with this hapless alleged, hapless Joe Gintz, what do you need a lawyer for? Okay, that's okay. And then, next one.
Wait a minute, before we start, let's take a stretch break. Stand up. You may be seated.
Okay, and before we get off Mr. Nolan and Joseph, yes. You know, you might look at me and go, I remember that. I read this into the record. This is under oath testimony, it's not up yet. But this was a question by Miss Lindsay at an investigative subpoena in 2012, May 18th. Miss Lindsay to Steve Vergona. Okay, now you also, they say in a newspaper article from March the 5th, 2002, given to the Detroit News, they indicate that you said that you brought Joe in to cut a deal and to cover yourself. The witness, Mr. Vergona, said, yes. Miss Lindsay, next question. What did you mean by that? The witness, well, what I meant is, yeah, I didn't want to say too much of a statement in front of the police department because I was going to get talked to a lawyer myself. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I absolutely guarantee you and promise you, if what I told you to your face was a lie, somebody would have been up by now. That's what was stated on this record. Why? All right, now, let's go to Joseph Gass for the bottom. Joe just showed up at Steve's Furniture one day. And I asked him, what do you mean? Jimmy just showed up. Uninvited. We're calling him. Joe just showed up at her place of employment at 11 p.m. Now look, you got to see Miss Raconin, okay? She came in here. My first time ever meeting her in life. Listen, and I don't say this lightly, and I don't believe in talking about people. I was scared of her, okay? And guess what? She was scared again. Because she told you how we tried to get her down some dark street, some direction-wise. But that's okay. Now, and then this is something we introduced. You know, we're talking about full and fair prosecution, full and fair process. You heard ad nauseum, allegedly from Baracco and anybody else that was Joe's friend, okay, about this $5,000. And that's the same $5,000 that they attributed to Bob Bashara. Although none of the communications that you saw from Bob Bashara and Mr. Gentz held that up. But trust me, it's our theory and it's absolutely right. Because we can never be wrong about anything. Introduced, it's a defense exhibit, and I don't know if it's D, E, F, but it's one of them. On 1/20/2012, there is a $5,000 deposit into Gentz's account at the Chase Bank from, guess who? Letty Gentz, the stepmother. Guess what he said? She was dead 12/17. Not charged with that? All right. Then, on 1/24/2012, that deposit was rejected by Chase Bank. Listen. How in the world would Bob Bashara know that? How would he know that? He wouldn't. And this $5,000 amount, there it is right there for you. And remember, there's a custody battle going on and all of that. I believe that was entered into the record. Things were heating up in that custody battle. And by, I believe, January 31st or 30th or something, he was going to have a trial on that issue. Okay, so on 1/24, when that check is rejected by Chase Bank, allegedly, Gentz just shows up at 552 Middlesex. He goes there on the same day that this check is returned. But this is supposedly the same day that Bob tells him, hey, get it done. Look at those phone records. You tell me where you see a call anywhere close in time to when allegedly there was some contact at that Middlesex address between Gentz and Bob Bashara. It's not there. Okay. So is this your theory? And I got to thinking about it. And when you talk about this leaf thing, and I'm looking at her clothes, she had on something I would wear if I'm running out the house. House shoes, socks, because my feet get cold. It's not going far though. Some pants, top, and a coat. Say this. Maybe this, how about trying this theory? What if Mrs. Bashara is leaving the house as Joe Gintz is coming up to the house? We know that that seat is pushed back. And where is JJ, by the way? They didn't investigate that. That's okay, because his name is Bob Bashara. And whatever happens, happens, but not at that house. Because the only thing that makes you know is that house from them is the lease. Look in that garage. You look. And I had to listen to that very disturbing evidence about this big, huge man accosting that woman. And they said, they showed you the boot, the left boot, the right boot, there's potential DNA. Okay. Look in that garage. Do you see any impression of a boot in that garage? And they had all the resources in the world. Do you see any of that? Do you see blood? That you see her face? You see her. Do you see any of that going on in that garage? What makes it the garage is the leaf. And it makes it the garage because it's convenient. And, you know, you're saying, oh my goodness, it had to happen there. How do we know that? And see, this may be something that you might be uncomfortable with because of all the sullying and the dirtying and he's a bad guy, he owes everybody in life, he doesn't pay everybody what he owes them, slow pay with Steve Tomato, slow pay if you're a little bit against, wrong person. Who said it happened? Who said that? And if you don't know, you don't fill in the blanks. That's what you said you couldn't do. That's their job. If you don't know it happened there, that's not him. That's their theory. And you heard Jimenez get up on that stand and just tell you, because I know how to testify. You think that they didn't all come together, and Ms. Lindsay told you that. They all came together and decided, with Bob, and you give Joe Gintz the consideration I know I couldn't get in a murder? A murder that brutal? But that's okay. Because guess what? We're going to keep him dirty. We're going to keep him filthy. We're going to keep him wallowing in the filth so you don't listen to this. None of this stuff came out at first. Of course, you know, there's a gag order. You can't talk about anything. By the time we get, the defense gets the case. So, well, no, that's not there, but it's out there. Once information is out there it stays. And then you always find yourself going, oh, it was in the media, it's in print media, it was there. Okay, well, Miss Lindsay can even agree. They get it wrong sometimes. And if you only get your information from one source, one-sided information, it's not going to work out. Next, please. Then lastly, and then I'm really going to leave you guys alone. We had ATF agents stand through. Now see, they tried to skew it. You know, he works for them, and all this data compilation, it comes from their eye on Bob. Okay. So from 8/1/11 through 1/31/12, there were 15,378 calls by Bob Bashara. That's a lot of calls. That's a chatty Cathy, but that's okay. The most calls were to Rachel Gillette, number one, followed by Jane Bashara, followed by Robert Fick, followed by Joe Gintz. Now, do you ask yourself, you wonder what might have happened to some of these witnesses when we weren't around? Because you know they were on their best behavior in this courtroom. You wonder what they might have told Bob Fick, look, your numbers in these records a whole lot. Did you do something? Who knows? Okay. But the DNA wouldn't tie Fick to it. Gintz would tie. The DNA would tie Gintz to it. Gintz called Bob 2/3 of the time during 2011. Now, here's where Stan Brewer is important. And remember, he was here 3 times because he was such an expert. Calls can be deflected from a busy tower to a less busy tower. What did Special Agent Hess, I guess it was him, get up there and say, nope, can never ever happen? Oh, really? Okay. If you don't think that they all came together to get Bob Bashara, he got another thing coming. Cannot say if all those calls connected. Now, when we're talking about all those calls, we're talking about calls to guests, especially those of short duration. So when you see all these little pieces of time on there, you can't say if they're connected. You can say there was a call, and you might think they're connected when you look at the time. Time can send you to voicemail time, but little bitty calls, 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, you can't say those are connected, and that's what Stan Bruce said. And also, he says calls sent to a busy cell tower can be redirected to a less busy tower, and that's in reference to his trial testimony. And we did get a transcript, thanks to the prosecutor, of Stan Bruce's testimony, in case you're wondering. And those are things that he said from his trial testimony. You just can't remember everything in a trial of this length. Okay, next please. So, this was exhibit number 23 that was introduced by the prosecution. Once again, from 8/1/11 to 1/31/12, a whole lot of calls in excess of 15,000. 1,000 of those were to Richard Gillette, 775 to Joe Bashara, 652 to Robert Fick, and 472 to Joseph Gibbs. So when you know everything that you got was a summary of their argument, of what their eye is looking for. What all the rest of them call? Who do they go to? But it didn't matter. Next, please. This is from exhibit number 29. In October 2011, Bob made 54 calls to Gibbs. November 2011, 65 calls to Gibbs. December 2011, 20 calls to Gibbs. And in January, 66 calls to Gibbs. The actual number of calls from Bob to Gibbs is consistent during October, November, and January. December being a holiday month. Okay. But remember what Stan Brew got up there and said? He said, you see a sharp inflection. You see a something sharp there in the calls, the dropping pattern, the calling pattern. You see it because you want to see it. And what else did we not see from Stan Brew? Now, you talked about that text message. I'm sorry, not text message, phone voicemail that Joseph Gibbs allegedly sends. Oh, no, not alleged. He sends to Mr. Bashara. Where is that? They have the technology. They have the resources. Where is that? They get everything else. Where are the phone records? Come on, somebody help me with all these people. You only get what makes Bob look guilty. You don't get anything to make him not look guilty because that's not their job. Now, next. All right. Stan Brew. Okay. This is a question that came right from the trial transcript when he got right up on this stand, took oath, and looked at you. Okay, so I believe what you're saying is that the phone can interact with any of those towers, correct? His response, answer, let's just say, for instance, if I were at Hoover and 8 Mile, and I were to make a call, I would interact with either the gray, the blue, or the yellow. And those are sectors, because those 3 sectors are designed to service the area, which includes 8 and Hoover. Correct. The question, correct. And just, they're designed to service that area, correct? And his response, yes, ma'am. And I believe that was questioning by the court. I believe so, but in any event, that's what he said. So, and I think I remember asking him, you can't say that one cell phone was next to the other. Cannot say that. But you can say it could have been in that sector interacting with any of those towers. That's all you can say. You can't, this is smoke and mirrors. This is what this is. You just want to put everything in that's one-sided and slanted, and that's your job. But you're vested. You are invested in this process, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is wrong. Now, McCarthy, he got a little more to say to you. But I just wanted to look at you and look you in your face because I'm not lying to you. I told you things as I saw them. We saw something. I can tell you, never seen it before. And I've had the pleasure, and I say the pleasure, of trying the case before Ms. Lindsay, Mr. Moran, and Mr. Muscat.
And what about Mr. Hinderline?
Hey, Mr. Hinderland. Hey, Mr. He's new on the scene. I'm not going to tell you how old I am, but, you know, I've had the pleasure of working with this young man. I mean, normally, it's the defense's job to point out that the investigation is bad. You understand that there are lapses in the investigation. Bad investigation is the death knell of the prosecutor. Miss Lindsay got up here in front of God and everybody.
You gotta speak up.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Listen, I want to take a stretch break one more time. We got a lot of information. We're gonna stop at 4:10, so you know, just take your time. It's okay. Please stand up. Okay, I'm sorry. When Detective Narduzzi got up on that stand, who knew? You never would have known that. You never would have seen that. I don't know, but you saw it. And you saw the passion that was displayed. You saw whatever the word is that first guy used. I think that was the word that might have covered what we saw. It was where I'm so vested in this process. You messed the investigation up. And let me tell you, this was not, you just can't put that in Grosse Pointe's lap. They didn't have the experience, but guess who did? Miss Lindsay's team had the experience. She's on this case extremely early. Okay? She not only is on this case, she has the full resources of the government, that the Wayne County government, seems like, at her disposal. You had Detroit police executing search warrants, getting search warrants signed by judges. You say, okay, this is what I say. And they sign it, you go in. You have that. And when I listen to what I heard, I was uncomfortable. I don't know if in my history of trying cases I've ever gotten up and objected to a berating of a police officer. It's just, it was too much for me. But you saw it. Had you not have seen it, would you listen to us when we told you that this investigation was messed up? Would you have listened to us? Would you have listened when we said that you went after Bob Bashara to the exclusion of all others? What in the... I'm cussing, I'm sorry. What in the hell do you mean you are police officers with guns and badges, and because somebody's uncooperative, they don't get interviewed anymore? Nothing else is done? What about his car? Well, does anybody know anything? Well, he was not cooperative. Well, listen, and I'm going to leave you with this. You know, Miss Lindsay, she very good attorney. She talked to you about the Bible. Let me talk to you about the police officers. They know their power. They know their power in front of the jury. And you know they know their power. We have situations going on all over this country where it tells you they know their power. Now, I don't know what went on with this because I didn't see it, but I know what went on with I can't breathe, and still you walk. Still
still you're out there. Because you know why? They know their power. They can get up there and say whatever they want. If that's what they're so inclined to, and that's fine. And let me tell you something else. I'm not knocking police officers, because all of them aren't bad. There are some damn fine officers that I've run across right here in Detroit, contrary to popular belief. Some of the best officers you're ever going to find, I believe, in this country. But when they're not cooperative, when they set their sights on you, hey, guess what? Can't breathe.
Let's take a straight break. You may be seated. They're breaking their time up, okay? And so we're going to allow, once Mr. McCarthy is done, the prosecutor has an hour, okay? But they won't talk today. So we'll finish that up tomorrow, and then we're going to be going straight into jury instructions. And then remember, 4 of you will be eliminated tomorrow. Okay, very good. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Your Honor, and thank you, Ms. Diallo. The next thing that I wanted to touch upon is the generosity. You know, Ms. Lindsay mentioned something about Mr. Bashara being a person of certain class, living there in Grosse Pointe, being the president of the Rotary, having a father who was a judge, and somehow or another that would remove him from all suspicion. Well, that doesn't line up squarely or at all with the reality of the fact that by the 27th of January, it was officially out of the bag that Bob Bashara was the suspect in this case. So whatever mileage he might have gotten out of the fact that he lived on Middlesex Street in Grosse Pointe Park, or the fact that his now deceased father was a judge at one time in history, or that he used to be the president of the Rotary, none of that mattered anymore, and none of it should matter, because all people should be equal under the law. The only thing is, those people should all be treated fairly. Now, you know, there's talk about Bob manipulating people, grooming people. And in thinking about that, I thought about this fellow, Ralph Lee. Ralph Lee testified early on in the trial, back in October, and he said that, you know, he was a handyman. He lived in one of Bob's apartments, and he went to Bob to get a place to live back in 2003 when he was in trouble with the law over a serious crime, some sort of a sex offense, and that he was going to have to go to jail. And then when he got out, because he was a sex offender, he was going to have to live a certain distance away from schools and couldn't be around children, and there was these restrictions going to be placed upon him. But Robert Bashara said that, well, okay, I'll give you a place to live. I'll help you. I'll give you some work. And that's what he did. And Ralph Lee was still his tenant, was still his handyman in 2012 when Bob ended up being arrested. So along comes Joe Gintz. The whole idea here in this conspiracy is that Bob, the mastermind, sees this guy who's down on his luck and needs a place to live and is grooming him to become a killer. Now, how's he going to even know that Joe Gintz is going to be down for killing somebody? I mean, that just seems preposterous. But in the prosecution's theory, that's the idea. So, yeah, he helps him. If you want to call it help, he takes him over there to Rebecca Fortin, for whom he's acting as the agent, and it ends up that through his sales pitch, Miss Fortin says, yeah, that's all right. Joe Gintz has got a guaranteed income because he's getting SSI or some other kind of a Social Security payment that's going to be direct deposited to her, so she's going to get paid. She's not going to have to worry about where his money's coming from. And with that in mind, she says, yeah, that's okay, he can live there. Bob helps him by putting the utilities in his name to get him started. Is he doing something because he's grooming Joe Gintz to go out and commit a crime? Or is he doing what he had done 9 years before or 8 years before with Ralph Lee? He helped somebody out. He helped this guy Monroe out. He let him have a place even though he was a felon. And apparently Thomas Ramsey the same. He's being fair-minded. And that goes with what he did in the bigger community. This is what he's doing in his everyday life, giving these little people who have trouble a break. Then he's the president of the Rotary. Yeah, that's a big deal. And to him, he's something he's very proud of. But the Rotary activities in which he was involved were generosity. It was raising money for people that needed it. That 3 million pound challenge that Mr. Carmody had to reluctantly acknowledge was Bob's idea, and he put a lot of effort into it, even though he and the rest of the Rotarians had made Bob a non-person by this time. That was Bob doing it. It was his idea, and then he saw it through to the end. In this business, that Mr. McSkimming talked about, and also Bob's relatives acknowledged when they testified, and the other people that knew him over at St. Michael's Episcopal Church, he raised money there. He did that willingly. He did fundraising activities for his daughter's school there, and this place where his son went, Grosse Pointe South. He was active in doing those kinds of things because he thought it was the right thing to do. So when Special Agent O'Riordan says that it's weird, or it's odd, or it's ridiculous, or whatever conclusion he wanted you to draw from, Bob Bashara saying, I'm the president of the Rotary, and he's pointing to this Rotary pin. If he had it on that day, I'm not sure, but at least he's talking about that. And he's saying, I couldn't possibly be charged with a crime because I'm the president of the Rotary, and he's not talking like he's some pompous, self-important person like Mr. Carmody. He's saying, you're asking me about killing my wife. You're asking me whether I'm a murderer. Or somehow or another put somebody else up to doing this. You're suspecting me. I've lived my whole life doing good things, not bad things for the world. And he doesn't tell them, I'm into this weird sex thing, and I got a girlfriend on the side, and I'll acknowledge that. Because he's not perfect. And none of us are. But when he's talking to, and in all fairness to Mark O'Riordan, the special agent from the Secret Service, he doesn't know all this background when he sits down to talk to Mr. Bashara, but we now know that background. And if you consider those statements that he made about being he says, I suspect me, I don't do that kind of a thing. That's what he meant. That's what he was saying that day. And then, this whole lifetime of doing good out in the community has to count for something. Is a person who's going to do those kind of things, are they going to be motivated to kill? Be involved in a brutal, horrible killing? Doesn't seem like it. But could a guy get strung out? Be overpressured? Make bad judgments? 4 or 5 months later, get himself hooked up with Steve Tabato and stupidly arrange or attempt to arrange for a hit on the guy that he thinks is throwing him under the bus and going to frame him, and who he would like to get some revenge against because he killed his wife? Yeah, he did that. And here's another thing that he did. He went into court and he pled guilty when he did that. Because that's a crime that he actually did commit. And we have up until 2012, Bob's not in any trouble in his life at all. In terms of any kind of conviction. Doesn't have one. But in 2012, he did acknowledge that he was a guilty man in the hit on Joe Gant's case. But in 2014, he's in trial because his plea is not guilty. Let's see the next. Lastly, I want to finish about what McCain had to say. We have Jessica Bashara talked about her mother telling her that she was happy with her marriage. In the spring of 2011, Bob and she went to Hawaii together with the Matthews, and they had a wonderful time, and she said, saved my marriage. She was happy. In 2011, in August, Stephanie Samuel is having a garage sale with Jane Bashara, and she says, afterwards, they're having a beer together when the day of sale is over with, and she says, we have a great relationship. Yes, there's been some rocky patches along the way. We've been to counseling. Things are good. In 2011, in January, Jane writes, and this is exhibit number 35, she writes this thing out that says, why we fight. Well, look at this. This is her handwriting. She has no idea that anyone would ever look at what she was writing. This is her talking to herself a year before she dies. She says, Bob makes plans and he doesn't tell me. Bob says he says things that he doesn't. Can't trust what he says, and Bob says things without talking to me, ... selling the house, ... going out with the guys. Is that something extraordinary? Is that any different than the average married couple may encounter in the course of 25 or 26 years of marriage, where there's going to be those ups and downs along the way, and you're going to have some things that happen, your communication breaks down a little bit, and then she says, well, he's making these plans, but he doesn't include me, he doesn't tell me what's going on. And I can't trust what he says, because he says things without talking to me. He's talking about selling a house, but he's not including her. He's going to go out with the guys, he doesn't tell her. These are everyday kind of problems people run across. You got to work your way through that. So they go to counseling. And she tells that to Stephanie in August. Yeah, things are really great. And then we've got her friend Lois Valente. Lois Valente, of all the friends that we had testimony from, Patricia Matthews, Deborah Breen, Eileen Stradilek, Roxanne Flaska. Debbie Breen's the only person, Lois Valente is the only person that she ever reveals the sexual oddness about Bob. She says he's into some weird things. She gives some details. She didn't do that with Patricia Matthews, but she did it with Lois Valente. Yeah, he wanted to go to this key party. Lois Valente is an innocent lamb. She doesn't even know what that's all about, so it had to be explained. And Jane is embarrassed by this. But they're close friends, and she shares that with her. And this is in 2009 or 2010. I told Bob he can do what he wants to do. Well, if that's true, and we have no reason to believe that it isn't, then he had the fitness teeth and he ran with it, rightly or wrongfully. But nevertheless, that's what happened. And then we get down 10 days before Jane. 10 days. The 14th of January in 2012.
Keep your voice up, please.
Yes, 14th of January in 2012, while Bob is in Oregon. Jane and Lois have lunch together. And Jane talks about the status of their marriage and the status of their relationship. And she says to this friend who she has shared intimate things before, she says, I prayed about it, and I reflected on it, and I decided that we did it before. We built up substantial wealth together, and that we can do that again. She's going to stay with Bob. She didn't want to card a divorce. And that was her frame of mind. That's what she was thinking. What she expressed to her close friend 10 days before her death. This man was going to benefit from continuing to be married to Jane Bashara, the loyal wife who is his partner, in spite of his peccadillos, in spite of his own, perhaps, moral shortcomings and his infidelities. She has no desire to end her marriage. She loves her husband. She's staying with him. Where is the motive for him to kill her? Why would he hurt a hair on her head? As Mrs. Diallo pointed out to you, all those times he's being recorded, he never says anything like that. And he doesn't know this. When he's on all those jail calls and he talks about, forever and ever and ever, he talks and talks and talks. You never hear anything like that. He never said anything like that because there would be no reason to say something. He didn't do it. I didn't kill my wife. That's what he said repeatedly. And we've seen these television clips, and he gave interviews, and did he tell the truth about the BDSM? No, he didn't. But as I said before, your determination, when the 12 of you speak in a unified voice, is going to be determined the difference between what really is and what merely seems to be. Now, I'm going to sit down in just a second. And now, tomorrow, you're finally going to get the case, and it'll be up to the 12 of you to decide what the real truth of this entire unfortunate episode has been. It is. And Mrs. Diallo and I, we've done everything we can do for Robert Bashara. We've done our honest best to present the best defense we know how, so that you all will be able to take those arguments, consider the evidence that's been presented in this crime, find out for yourselves whether there is proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And remember this, as Judge Evans is going to tell you tomorrow, a reasonable doubt is just that. It's a doubt based on reason and common sense, by looking at the evidence or the lack of evidence. And I submit to you, as I said in the beginning, there are big gaps in the evidence. There's a lack of evidence here. And nothing proves that he intended, first of all, conspired to kill James Bashara, conspired with Joe Gaines, solicited Joe Gaines to kill James Bashara, aided and abetted Joe Gaines in the first-degree murder of James Bashara. And did he really obstruct justice? Because he tried to find witnesses who would support him when he was a free man? Did he really obstruct justice when he offered Robert Fick a ride down to the investigative subpoena? Did he really obstruct justice when he's talking to Will Schatz and asking him to give him a letter of support, which Schatz did, now relents or kind of rejects and says, "Oh no, I got forced into doing that"? Is that what he was doing? I ask you, on behalf of Bob Bashara, to return the verdicts that are fair and just, based on the evidence and the lack of evidence in this case. 1 through 5, not guilty. Thank you for all the attention and the sacrifice you've made to be with us during these past 10 weeks. Thank you for the devotion you've brought to always showing up every day and being a part of this very important case, important to the people of the state of Michigan and important to Robert Bashara. Thank you for being a part of the third part of our government, the judiciary. And I know that you're going to do the right thing. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you. Okay, the van will be here at 4:15. See you bright and early 9:30. Now remember, wait a minute. No, just hold on. Okay, long day. This will happen when you're old. You forget what you don't say. Okay, here we go. All right. Don't watch TV or anything. 9:30. The people have 55 minutes. Take a little break. Then I'm going to give you my instructions. Those are instructions that you have to follow. That's the law. They're in your notebooks, and you'll be able to take those notebooks back. 4 of you will be eliminated, and I anticipate that will be before lunch, because after we do the 55 minutes, take a 15-minute break. I'm going to give you those instructions. Then we're going to eliminate 4 of you, break for lunch, and then you begin your deliberation. So this may be the last day, well, tomorrow, the last day that you will be with your fellow jurors. Knock on the door when you're ready to go. All rise for the jury. All rise for the jury. Knock on the door when you're ready to go to the jury. Jury number 16, you going to start, or did you take it back?
Yeah, it was.
Okay.
I was doing cool.
Can the attorneys approach?
Yeah.